Welcome to the Dewey Show, where I talk about news, current events, and everything else that I think you'll find interesting. The Dewey Show only partners with companies that I think are the best in their field, which is why the Dewey Show is brought to you by AdamMel.com. AdamMel.com has literally thousands of items that will spice things up in your bedroom. AdamMel.com has sex toys, anal douches, lubricants, BDSM equipment. Like I said, literally thousands of items. As amazing as that isn't even the best part, folks. The best part is if you go to AdamMel.com and you use the offer code Dewey at checkout, you'll get 50% off of almost any one item, as well as free and always discreet shipping. That is AdamMel.com, AdamMale.com. Offer code DEWEY. All right, folks, welcome to the Dewey Show. My name's Dewey. I am, of course, your host. Something that I'd like to apologize to you right now for. I'm just kidding. I've got two big podcast episodes coming out today. We're going to be talking about one of the weirdest court cases I've been paying attention to, which is Karen Reid and John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe was a decorated police officer, and he winds up dead one night. And I'll get into both the defense and the prosecution's inferences on what happened that night. And for some, it's like, well, Dewey, it's pretty clear. And then there's others that are like, well, really? Is it that clear? So I figured, since it's so interesting to me, that I would give it a shot with you folks. I would let you decide, okay? And I would like to know what you think. I would like to know your thoughts on the podcast, and also on what you think when it comes to O'Keefe and Reid, okay? So let's get started. We're going to start with the prosecution's arguments, okay? In this heart-wrenching case, the prosecution lays that the blame squarely at the feet of Karen Reid, alleging that her actions led directly to the untimely death of Officer John O'Keefe. According to the prosecution and the narrative of events that take shape on that night, Karen Reid, John O'Keefe, and several of their acquaintances gathered for a lively party in a quiet neighborhood in Canton, Massachusetts. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Reid and O'Keefe reportedly exited the gathering together, with Reid assumed to be in control of the vehicle. This is where the prosecution's version of the story begins to unfold, and it is very dark. I want you to know that. Around 12:30 a.m., O'Keefe, with her vehicle, causing him significant, I skipped a line. The prosecution asserts that Reid, while driving, struck O'Keefe with her vehicle, causing him significant injury outside of the party location. What happened next, according to the prosecution, is a series of omissions and failures that would seal O'Keefe's fate. They claimed that Reid, after realizing she had hit O'Keefe, made the harrowing choice not to stop, not to render aid, and instead haul ass from the scene. This critical decision, the prosecution argues, let John O'Keefe, exposed to the winter elements, dressed inadequately for the freezing temperatures. John O'Keefe was later discovered in the early hours of the morning, unresponsive and exhibiting signs of extreme hypothermia. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. He succumbed to his injuries. The autopsy report highlighted both blunt force trauma, which was consistent with being struck by a vehicle, and severe hypothermia, obviously. The prosecution hinges its case on several pivotal points. 1, negligence. They allege that Reid drove recklessly and possibly under the influence of alcohol or other substances. Thereby, Reid endangered everyone on the road, especially Officer O'Keefe. Failure to render aid. They assert that Reid's most egregious act was her failure to provide immediate assistance to O'Keefe after the accident. By leaving the scene, she disregarded her duty to offer help, which could have potentially saved his life. Intentional evasion. The prosecution portrays Reid's choice to flee the scene as an attempt to avoid responsibility and avoid legal repercussions, suggesting a conscious guilt. Through these points, the prosecution paints a picture of a night marred by poor decisions, a lack of accountability, and ultimately tragic consequences. They maintain that Reid's actions were not just negligent, but criminally liable, and they seek to hold her accountable under the full extent of the law. The defense's argument. Now we're going to get into her defense, okay? Now let's turn to the other side of the courtroom. Karen Reid's defense team offers a narrative that starkly contrasts with the prosecution's portrayal. They argue passionately that Reid is being wrongfully accused, victimized, a desire to find someone to blame for this tragic accident. The defense sets forth a series of arguments aimed at dismantling the prosecution's case, 1 point at a time. No evidence of reckless driving or impairment. The defense opens by challenging the notion that Reid was driving recklessly or under the influence. They argue that there were no substantial evidence to suggest that she was impaired by alcohol or any other substance at the time of the incident. They highlight Reid's clean driving record and responsible behavior earlier in the evening, questioning the foundation of the prosecution's claims. 2. Accidental impact. The defense posits that if Karen Reid did indeed strike John O'Keefe, it was purely accidental. They argue that the visibility conditions were poor, possibly due to heavy rain, fog, or for the darkness of the night. They insist that Reid could not have seen O'Keefe in time to avoid the collision, and thus the incident was an unfortunate accident rather than a result of reckless behavior. Just to take a quick break here to remind you folks that today's episode is sponsored by AdamMail.com. AdamMail.com has literally thousands of items that will spice up your sex life. They have sex toys, condoms, lubricants, anal douches, BDSM equipment. Like I said, thousands of items. You'll be like a kid in a candy store. So head over to AdamMail.com, and if you use the offer code Dewey at checkout, folks, you'll get 50% off of almost any one item, as well as free and always discreet shipping. That's AdamMail.com, ADAMMALE.com. Offer code DEWEY. Along with everything else I talk about today, this information is in the description of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we're back. All right, folks, welcome back. Let's get finished up here. 3. Disputed timeline. A critical element of the defense's strategy is to scrutinize the timeline presented by the prosecution. The defense argues that the exact time when John O'Keefe was struck cannot be definitely determined. They suggest that O'Keefe may have been injured later by another vehicle, or under entirely different circumstances. This alternative timeline has introduces reasonable doubt into Reid's involvement in the incident. Sorry, I'm having a hell of a time without my glasses. Let me actually put those on. You guys are probably like, "Come on, Dewey! Like, we're fucking trying to be nice and supporting you, but there's only so much we can do." Let's see. Character witness and circumstantial evidence. The defense brings forth character witnesses to vouch for Karen Reid's integrity, responsibility, and compassionate nature. These witnesses portray Reid as a conscientious individual who would never knowingly leave someone in distress. Additionally, the defense challenges the circumstantial evidence, arguing that it does not directly tie Reid to the act of hitting O'Keefe, and that other explanations for his injuries must be considered. The fact that hypothermia was the primary cause. The defense contends that while O'Keefe did suffer from blunt force trauma, it was a prolonged exposure to cold that ultimately took his life. They argue that even if Reid had immediately rendered aid, it's not certain that O'Keefe would have survived in the night's extreme conditions. The defense suggests that focusing solely on Reid's actions overlooks the complexity of the situation and oversimplifies the truth and the true cause of O'Keefe's death. Now, that's just true. You have to look at everything that happens on the timeline. Okay, lack of motive, right? That's a big one. Vince also highlights the absence of any clear motive for Reid to harm O'Keefe. They argue that casting Reid was a villainous figure acting with malevolent intent does not align with her used to challenge the prosecution's narrative and emphasize the improbability of Reid acting with such disregard for human life. The defense rests on the principle that in a criminal case, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution, which may establish Reid's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. By presenting these alternative theories and scrutinizing the prosecutor's evidence, and defense seeks to create sufficient doubt in the minds of the jurors, arguing that Reid should be acquitted of any charges. Okay, now, where are we right now is basically a really good question to ask. And the conclusion of this is basically, the case of Karen Reid and John O'Keefe is a poignant reminder of how complex and multifaceted legal battles can be. On one hand, we have a prosecution arguing that Reid's neglect actions and failure to render aid resulted in the tragic loss, framing a portrait of irresponsibility and evasion. On the other hand, we have a defense that is questioning every aspect of the prosecution's narrative, painting Reid as a victim of the circumstance and tragic coincidence. As we await the court's decision, the stakes remain incredibly high, not only for Karen Reid, but also for the broader community seeking justice for Officer John O'Keefe. The arguments from both sides illuminate the difficulties in deciphering truth from a night shrouded in ambiguity and loss. Folks, yeah, that's where we're at, and I will keep you updated as soon as I know anything about the case. Please remember to support today's sponsor, AdamMail.com. They have thousands of items like sex toys, condoms, lubricants, underwear, BDSM. They got everything you can think of. head over there, ADAMMALE.com, and the offer code is DEWEY, and you can find all of that information in the description of this episode. Also, the patreon.com/deweyshow is also going to be in the description of today's show. And yeah, folks, I love you very much. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to my show. I really appreciate it. And folks, remember that love is everything.